Howdy everybody, this is Omar, your audio amigo, and welcome to the 5th episode of the Headphone Hoedown. Hifiman is one of the more well-known headphone brands, known mostly for their planar magnetic headphones. One of their most popular releases in the last several years has been the Edition XS. Since it launched, it has been a mainstay of sort of best headphones under $1,000 lists, and has been an even better value now that the price has dropped a significant bit since launch. So, imagine the excitement when Hifiman announced these. The brand spanking new Edition XV, priced at $400 US and designed to complement, not replace, the existing Edition XS. With a new headband and chassis design and new versions of the iconic egg-shaped planar drivers, does the XV offer enough of an upgrade over the XS, or is this something completely different? Quick disclaimer, these are on loan from my friend Jaytiss for review. They do have to go back at the end of filming, but since I didn't pay for these, I've gone ahead and activated the paid promotion feature here on YouTube. As you guys know, I do these disclaimers because I believe in full transparency when there's potential bias besides my own personal taste at play. Massive shout out to Jaytiss for loaning me this set. You can check out his channel up here, and again in the description below. Send him my thanks. He does great reviews. On with the show. If you've purchased a Hifiman product in recent years, you'll recognize the classic Hifiman box. The XV comes packed in there in foam, cool feature of which is the center beam of which can be pulled out to use as a headphone stand. It fits the Edition XV rather nicely. This is a feature that they've been doing for quite a while. It comes on a bunch of their other headphones. It's just a nice little thing to include in the box. Even if it doesn't look super aesthetic, it's just a nice inclusion. Seeing as you don't get any case or bag or anything to make traveling with these easier, it's just a nice to have. You also get the classic Hifiman cable, which we'll talk about in just a second, and that comes with a 1/4-inch adapter, which is always a good inclusion. This is classic Hifiman packaging. It doesn't differ too much from other headphones sort of around this price point. Really would like to have seen a carry case here, but you know, I don't expect one. I just think it makes travel so much nicer. Let's talk about the classic Hifiman cable. It's the same one that basically used to come with every single Hifiman headphone. It's the exact same design. It feels like it's improved. I feel like it used to be outright terrible. And while I still have been using one of my aftermarket cables as opposed to this, I feel like this version of the cable is just a bit more pliable and behaves a bit better than past generations of the same cable. It still retains some of its, kinks and loops from when it was, packed up, but it just feels better. It's still very rubbery, but I would like to recognize that they have been improving the cable somewhat. Next step, Hifiman, I think, is going to be nicer hardware. This very industrial, just sort of plastic-looking hardware doesn't do you a whole lot of favors. I did measure the electrical resistance of this cable, and it came in at 0.3 ohms, which is quite low, which is nice to see. But yeah, still not a great cable, but improved, at least in my opinion, from the older cables, which, people just junked right away. Unlike the cable, which has only improved slightly, the Edition XV, as you can see, is riding on Hifiman's newest chassis and sort of build design. It's a complete departure from the old comfort headbands that you used to see on the sort of Arias and also on the like Sundara and that sort of thing. They've upgraded the materials here to be composite. There's full metal yokes that extend in here with the adjustment mechanism. And yeah, it's this new design with a vented comfort strap here at the top. I think it looks pretty snazzy. They've kept the standard Hifiman sort of click to adjust mechanism for the yokes here. The cups still have quite nice, in and out swivel, as well as full sort of rotation this way, which is excellent for comfort. Gone as well is the creaky, squeaky nature of the plasticky headband from the Edition XS. Wearing these and sort of pivoting them around, you get way less of that creaking noise than you got on the Edition XS. Another change, as you can see from the way that they changed the back vent here, is that you no longer get that ringing artifact that you could get if something brushed up against the sort of window shade metal structure on the back of the XS. So that's a good thing. I know one of the popular mods for the XS was to put a piece of rubber between the drivers and the grille to reduce resonances. That's no longer an issue here thanks to this new grille design. The pads, as you can see here, are essentially identical to the ones on the Edition XS. They use the same snap-in plastic clips that hold them in place that Hifiman tends to use. These aren't mine, so I don't want to take these off fully, but just there's clips all around the outside that hold the pad into the frame here. That's not a great thing for upgrade options. It means that essentially the pad manufacturers need to make compatible clip structures to clip onto these. It does limit upgrade options, but not that many companies make egg-shaped drivers, so it's less of an issue just finding pads that will fit full stop. The left and right markings are clearly indicated on the inside of the yoke here, but these are a sort of non-symmetrical design, so it's pretty easy to tell which one left and right is by just sort of holding the headphone. The pads are also slightly angled. Overall, in my opinion, while this headband still isn't perfect, we'll discuss a little bit of that in the comfort section, especially with some smaller heads. Personally, I think that in terms of build quality and overall design, this is a huge upgrade over the original Edition XS in terms of build quality, at least. As I pull up the specifications here, you can see that Hifiman is using a new diaphragm and a new magnet design, which Hifiman is calling their Neo Supremo Gen 2 with enhanced magnets. These new drivers are essentially about as easy to drive as the original XS. They do require a bit more current, but a bit less voltage to hit 110 dB. A standard dongle should have no issues with these at all, and I had no problems with any of my sources. Weight is up compared to the XS, as that new headband exists now. This is about 40 grams heavier, but it still comes in under 500 grams, so it's still on the lighter side compared to some other heavier planars. Clamp force has seen a noticeable increase from the Edition XS, which will either be a welcome change or something that you will really dislike depending on how you wore the XS. It reminds me a bit of the clamp force on the Aria 2 in that it's a little bit on the firm side, but it's not too bad overall. We'll discuss that more in the comfort section. Overall, I would say the specs are similar to the Edition XS, which honestly makes a lot of sense. Time then for the cool wall, and I'll go ahead and start by saying that I find very few Hifiman designs to be straight up cool. Their design language has always been this sort of semi-industrial sort of form over, or function over form sort of aesthetic. Their headbands and cups have always been designed in service of their drivers rather than aesthetics. While I like the overall shape and design of the grills as well as the new headband, I wish they would have kept the design black. The Edition X, XX, and XS have all been sort of black with silver accents, and while I understand that Hifiman is transitioning to this more silver look, I think that the black would have been a nice sort of nod to the family identity here. I do like the design here with the fadeaway grills. They're very open here on the inside, and then they get a sort of smaller holes as you get to the outside. That's a pretty cool design. I am going to be sticking these in cool just because I think that the sort of interesting hole pattern there and the general look of the headphone I think is different enough from the rest of the Hifiman family that it sort of sticks out. I think a lot of people will take a look at the sort of size and shape and go, I don't want these, but I think they're still pretty cool. Speaking of going, I don't like these, let's check in with the Council of Ladies and see what they have to say. Are these cool? No. A single cool from lady number 3, a meh, and 3 no's. So I'd say that these aren't exactly good looking. They will start conversations though with a score of 3-2 in favor of telling someone that, hey, these look a certain way. Looking through their thoughts, there is a lot of bad, but also some not so bad. Some of the ladies appreciate how slim they look from the front. Planar drivers are nice and thin, but the sheer shape and size of these egg-shaped drivers is drawing a lot of criticism, as does the overall design of the sort of ear cups and the grills on the back. Comparisons to cheese graters, dumpsters, and trash cans aren't exactly good thoughts to have. Comfort here on the Edition XV is not perfect, but for most people it will be leagues better than the Edition XS, and as a large-eared gentleman, I can agree. One of the best things about these Hifiman egg-shaped planars is, for me at least, I can fit my entire ear in this space without having my earlobe touch down here or the top of my ear touch up here. It's just a really nice thing. I can fit my whole massive ear in here, no problems. Also, as someone who likes the Aria V2 and doesn't mind the intense clamp force on that headphone, I really don't mind the clamp force here on the XV. Like on the Aria, however, if I had them too low on my head, if this was maybe a bit too long adjusted, I would get some hot spots forming down here where the cup hits sort of my jaw area. Moving up the cups a bit higher helped, and this was my preferred position. These pads are not bad. They're classic. They're the ones that come with the Edition XV. They do build up a little bit of heat. It's not nearly as bad as it can be on some closed back headphones with, thicker, more leatherish pads, but there is heat buildup. The comfort band here is pretty good. I like the ventilation they've done by cutting the holes here. I do wish it had a bit more give in it. It doesn't exactly stretch too much. These attachment points don't have any sort of elasticity to them. I also wish it was a little bit more padded. That said, they do a good job of taking up the weight of the headphone, and in my opinion, overall, the XV is easily more comfortable than the Edition XS. I will say, however, that as a large-headed, large-eared person, I was able to wear the Edition XS with no modifications. It was perfectly comfortable for me. I am able to wear both of these, the XV or the XS, for 4 or 5 hours with no problems at all. The main change for comfort, at least from what I have read, has been people with smaller heads. I had these, as I mentioned earlier, on 2 to 3 clicks to be comfortable, which is a change from the Edition XS, where I was at 1 and sometimes 2 clicks. My statement of these being better for smaller heads is based on people's experiences I've read online. A lot of people with smaller heads are saying, oh, I never in a million years could wear the XS unless I had, the Dakoni nuggets, as well as the capper strap and a whole bunch of other mods. A bunch of people who are saying that are like, oh, I can wear these without mods. My wife disagrees with that sentiment. She actually prefers the comfort on the original XS compared to here on the XV. She prefers the lower clamp force on the XS because she essentially wears them as ear speakers. They don't put a ton of pressure on her head, they don't seal super well, and she just sort of treats them like K1000s or the upcoming Ep.6 K1K. By contrast, the increase in clamp force here on the XV, she does not like at all. Her head is much, much smaller than mine. This essentially takes up the entire side of her head, and this part down here puts a lot of pressure on her jaw, and it starts to hurt after short listening sessions. She ended up giving these a score of only if I had to on the second head test, which is not super great. I think if you're okay with some clamp force, the XV will be quite comfortable, but if you have a small head and you are sensitive to clamp force, maybe look elsewhere. But with comfort done, let's get started in on the sound, kicking things off with a happy place for planars, the bass. The bass here on the Edition XV just feels effortless. It moves a lot of air in a very dynamic way. It's a little more meaty and weighty than on some of the other egg-shaped planars that I've tried, and it has a good sense of heft and weight to low notes while retaining some of that planar attack and speed that we all like so much. Air from Granadelia with those buzzy, energetic bass drops sounded really dynamic and punchy. It was fast, it was articulate, just as I expected bass to be here on a planar. The mid bass honestly was just as good. Big Log, for example, that big bass drum, the iconic bass line, you feel the buzz and the thump of each note clearly in the ears with no real lack of energy or emphasis. It feels very in line with the track. I have no complaints at all for these in terms of bass. Some folks will be wanting more bass quantity here, but I think that the balance of quantity and quality here is fantastic. The overall presentation of bass is excellent, and this is a planar, so you can just EQ in the bass shelf, or you can wear blue light blockers because these do the thing where if the seal breaks a little bit, the bass response increases. So yeah, get yourself some blue light blockers, enjoy the bass. Planar bass typically means clean mids, and that is the case here. The bass does mean that there's a little bit of warmth that doesn't come across as slow, muddy, or lethargic, and it stops the mid-range from feeling lean, papery, or thin. Holy Diver, for example, that aggressive, distorted guitar sounds awesome here on the XV. Dio's vocals have that iconic tonality and energy. The whole track just sounds fantastic here on the XV. The lower mids have some wonderful body to them. Acoustic guitars, acoustic bass, horns, piano, all sounded awesome. All of the instruments are forward with excellent clarity. As I move into the upper mids and the female vocals, we find a little bit of that classic Hifiman Soundstage dip going on. What that means is that some instruments and female vocals do end up feeling slightly pushed back, but not so much that I find that the tonality gets completely ruined. Watame in What an Amazing Swing, for example. She sounds softer and gentler than she normally would in a more neutral or vocal forward headphone. She doesn't come across as nasal or thin, but crucially, she's not husked over, and she doesn't sound like she's having to fight the bass or the instruments for attention. Her backing vocals and the guitar in the right ear are very well balanced with her vocals, and this song has that big fake type electro swing bass, so the fact that she doesn't lose is actually pretty good here. I think overall the mid-range presentation here is really good. It might not be as vocal forward as some might prefer. I personally think it's quite nice, especially with higher pitched female vocals. The added softness to female vocals isn't really the tonal or timbral killer that you would think it would be, at least not on this headphone. The fact that the mids are tuned that way, and then the upper mids and treble are relaxed, smooth, and toned down, makes the XV come across as a very mid-centric, warm-leaning headphone compared to basically everything else in the Hifiman portfolio. I threw all of my usual sibilance and fatigue and shout tests at this thing, and even at what for me is a higher volume, I was fine, which is something I can't really say about any other Hifiman egg-shaped planar. The vocal harmonics in Baby Love from the Supremes are perfectly palatable. Those, shoe effects and the whispery vocals here, they're energetic and aggressive, but when the song comes on shuffle and I just finished jamming out to some, bass music, I didn't find myself reaching for the volume knob, which is huge. Same story with the treble overall. There's enough sparkle here so that things don't sound flat and lifeless, but there's also not so much energy that it will end up fatiguing you. Those electronic sweeps and tones from Psych Rock aren't so intense that I felt like I immediately needed to, crank the volume down. They still had a very aggressive, incisive sound. These are very early electronic tones, so it makes sense. But I will say this is the first Hifiman egg-shaped planar where I can let myself be less careful with the volume knob. If a song comes on and I want to jam out at a higher than usual volume, the XV won't punish me for it, which is something that hasn't happened with an egg-shaped Hifiman planar. Egg-shaped planars are typically known for their technical performance, and at the low end of things, the XV does not disappoint. The fast, snappy, oscillating bass notes in Spaceman have all of the ridiculously quick, responsive texture that I expect a planar driver of this size to have, and the subtones and harmonics are crisp and well balanced in the replay. Where the XV does pay the price for its more relaxed tuning is, as you would expect, with the top-end detail and resolution. That doesn't mean it's not a very nice resolving headphone. It still absolutely aced my Waltz for Debbie test with flying colors. The background conversation was right in the sweet spot of audibility. All the glassware noises came through very well. I just personally don't think that this is as resolving a headphone as the Edition XS. Then again, that was sort of the party piece of the Edition XS, was how much detail and resolution you got at a given price. Although this isn't quite a match for the XS, honestly, just turn up the volume. You're allowed to do that with this one because of that tuning. The other area where the XV has to sort of pay the price for being different from the family members is with its perceived 3D soundstage. The stereo separation here is excellent. Mediterranean Sundance, that whole Friday Night in San Francisco album, wonderful separation with all three guitarists. I didn't feel like either one of them was, sort of closed in or restricted in terms of width. The whole album sounds fantastic here on the XV in terms of, horizontal space. The perceived 3D soundstage is also pretty good. Spanish Harlem Orchestra's version of Late in the Evening has really good imaging and nice staging. The distance of the different drums from sort of center image to where the horns are, it's all rendered very well by the XV. The only comment I have is that the staging here does not feel as wide or crucially as tall as it can on some of the other Hifiman egg-shaped planars. The soundstage is still pretty darn good. This is an open-backed large planar after all. It just falls short of some of its siblings. I hope that I've articulated the tuning here on the XV rather well. It's essentially a warmer, more mid-centric take on the Hifiman house sound that's actually more different to its family members than you might originally think. The reduced treble places more focus on the bass and mids, giving the XV a lush, pleasing sound signature that allows you more volume than is typical for the other Hifiman planar headphones. I'll go ahead and get into some more specific comparisons, both with some Hifiman headphones as well as some other brands, including one headphone from another brand that I think is actually a better match for the XV than anything Hifiman is currently making. We'll go ahead and kick things off by having a look at the headphone that came out and then immediately took the fight to the Edition XS. It is the FiiO FT1 Pro, or FiiO FT1 Pro, priced at $220 US. The XV here is warmer overall than the FT1 Pro, but that does come with a few asterisks. First of all, the FT1 Pro here has a very rumbly, dynamic bass presentation. It can come across a little bit slower in the attack than the Edition XV, so if you prefer a sort of thicker texture, the FT1 Pro could offer that at the cost of some of that speed and accuracy in the bass. The other difference you're going to hear is in the upper treble, where the XV's Hifiman DNA does lead it to have a little bit of airiness compared to the F1 Pro. That gives some notes a little bit of extra sparkle on the XV, which is nice considering that the treble and upper mids here are generally more subdued and less energetic than they can be on the FT1 Pro. In terms of resolution, I actually find these two fairly even. I think the FT1 Pro is more resolving in the sort of conventional sense, especially if you perceive detail up in the treble. But the XV's more mid-centric tonality can make it sound like the more detailed set if you listen to more instrumental sort of mid-range focused tracks. In terms of comfort, personally, I do find the FT1 Pro to be the more comfortable of the two, but neither of these is perfect in terms of comfort, and neither of these is perfect in terms of build quality. The XV actually feels like a more solid headphone sort of to handle in the hands than the FT1 Pro. It is double the price, however. This is $400, this is $220, so that's sort of to be expected. The FT1 Pro still provides a fantastic value. It also comes with a carry case, which is super nice. If you can deal with the brighter sound, it's quite good, but if you're even the little bit treble sensitive, I think that the XV will be the safer choice. But let's get into the comparison that I've basically been talking about all video. It's this set's predecessor, the Hifiman Edition XS, priced between $200 and $240, depending sort of on where you're shopping and when you're looking. Again, I've been talking about this all video, but the XS is essentially a brighter, more detailed, more technical, less comfortable, more cheaply built Edition XV, but with wider and taller soundstage. At or around $200 US, this is an absolute steal for how resolving and technical of a sound this is. In my opinion, it edges out not only this, but also the FT1 Pro in terms of overall technical performance and resolution. However, it is also, in my opinion, the least comfortable and the least solidly built of the three. Now, there are a ton of mods from Capra, Deconi, Custom Cans, and more to make the fit of these more comfortable. So if you're just looking for a affordable EQ baseline or sort of the best technicalities for a given dollar, this can be an extremely compelling option. But if you're looking for something actually different from Hifiman, I think the XV could be more your speed. Speaking of something different from Hifiman, what about a less egg-shaped option? I'm talking, of course, about the also brand new HE600, priced at $800 US. This is twice the price of the XV, but what this gets you is sort of the perfect middle ground between the classic sort of Hifiman house sound and the XV. The HE600 here retains some of that mid-centric, warmer tonality of the XV, but it combines that with more resolution, more soundstage, more technical performance, and more forward vocals, at least in my opinion. The bass on these two, I think, is actually quite similar. I found that the HE600 had maybe a little bit of extra oomph on the low end with some of those deeper, rumblier notes. Again, if you are treble sensitive, the XV is going to be for sure the safer choice, as the HE600 is overall more energetic across the upper mids and treble compared to the XV. In terms of value, I think the XV is a pretty great value option, especially if you're looking for that warmer, more relaxing sound. The HE600 is an absolute superstar, though. Look out for the review for this one, because I think this is also an awesome headphone. but I teased it at the beginning of the comparison section. I mentioned a headphone that has more in common with the XV than any other Hifiman headphone, at least of what I have in my collection. And here it is. The Audeze LCD-X, priced at $1,200 US. I found that the way that the XV presents its bass and mid-range is very LCD-X coded to my ears. The LCD-X is a little bit heftier in the low end, but the XV is a little bit faster. Besides that, though, they present the bass and mid-range pretty similarly. Female vocals are a bit more forward here on the LCD-X, and the lower treble has a bit more brilliance to it here. Still not what I would call fatiguing, but the XV has a bit more of that harmonic energy with female vocals, and the mids here are just a hair more forward to my ears than on the LCD-X. In terms of build quality, you know, the LCD-X is built like an absolute tank, and it weighs about as much as a tank as well. It's also 4 times the price. The XV is a slightly warmer LCD-X, so if you want to be absolutely safe in terms of treble energy, this is still the safer choice. But to me, you could look potentially at the XV of basically being a mini LCD-X, which I think is pretty cool. Okay, brought everyone in for my sum up. Let's put these in sort of overall treble energy order. At the very top, the brightest sounding of these headphones, we've got the Edition XS. This is classic Hifiman house sound, sparkly, bright, brilliant, detailed, fatiguing, uncomfortable, but is currently the cheapest set on the table depending on where you shop, and is an incredible value. One step down from this in terms of brightness and brilliance is the FT1 Pro. This has more ear pad options. It has a slightly different, more dynamic bass presentation at the cost of some speed, but this is not as wide or as detailed sounding as the XS. It is, however, more comfortable. The HE600 is what I think is sort of in the middle in terms of treble energy and presentation. It's warmer than these two, but not as warm as these two. This is a wonderful blend of the classic Hifiman house sound with some more warmth and vocal energy while retaining the wide, technical, detailed sound of the rest of the family. This is a pretty special set of headphones. I really like it. Review coming soon. Next, we have the LCD-X. Here's where we start getting a little bit warmer, a bit more relaxing in terms of overall tonality. This is the most expensive set on the table. It's got the build quality to match. The sound is hefty. It's got a good warmth on the low end. Similar vocal forwardness to the 600 here, but not as forward with the harmonics or treble as on the 600. If you want some of that Audeze goodness, this is a great way to go. Finally, we have the XV. Compared to the XS, this is a case of upgraded build, upgraded drivers, more of a side grade in terms of tuning. This is not as wide or detailed as the XS, but for those who are treble sensitive or prefer a warmer, richer sound on their planar headphones, I bet it feels really great that this now exists. But before I get even more ahead of myself, let's go ahead and bring up the Audio Amigo Arbitrary rating scale and figure out how the XV is going to stack up. The XV is something different from Hifiman. Hifiman has been giving us soundstagey, airy, technicality forward, bright, excitable planars for basically ever. The XV, I feel, is their take on a warmer, more relaxing sound signature. It's their olive branch to the treble sensitive. The comfort here, while not perfect, is vastly improved compared to the XS, and there really isn't anything in the tuning here that gives me pause whenever I crank the volume. Personally, of all the new Hifiman headphones, this is my second favorite. I do find myself preferring the HE600, but I 100% understand people who say that this is the best of the new Hifiman headphones. I think that the XV will end up being an absolute crowd pleaser. I can see a ton of people who tried the Edition XS or the Aria Stealth or the HE1000 and said, nope, these are way too bright, I can't do this. A lot of those people, I think, will actually really like these. You do lose some of that soundstage and technical performance magic, but you gain the ability to just really jam out. They're pretty easy to drive for planars, and overall, I think their sound signature will just make this a sort of default recommendation for people who want to spend, 400-ish bucks on a safe but still open-backed technical sounding planar. I'm going to be putting these in This Is Brilliant. If it was just that little bit more comfortable, I would essentially have no issues recommending these to everybody as my full-on open-backed planar recommendation under $500. But as they sit currently, I'm sure there'll be some mods for this comfort band here. They're an extremely good value in terms of sound quality. I think that these will end up being a lot of people's favorite Hifiman headphones. They're really, really nice, honestly. That leads me rather neatly into the recommendation. Who do I think should buy the Edition XV? Well, if you're into the classic sort of Hifiman treble forward, full send on details, give me all that soundstage house sound, and you're looking to upgrade your HE400, your Sundara, or your Edition XS, this definitely won't be it. In a similar way, this will not be a sort of mini HE600 or mini Aria Unveiled. So if that's what you're looking for, this is not what you're going to want to grab. Who this is for, however, is somebody who wants an open-backed planar but has been scared away because they're treble sensitive or they just prefer a warmer sound. They're really going to like this, I think. This also works well, as I said earlier, if you've been, tempted by a LCD-X. If you want to try a similar sound to it, but for a third the price, I think that this is a very solid option. Again, if you've been burned by treble fatigue on things like the Aria, the Ananda, the Edition XS, and you're willing to give Hifiman another chance, I think that this is probably their best chance to make a positive impression on you. If you have the ability to go find a dealer or an audio show near you, you owe it to yourself to go give this a shot. You might really love it. I know I certainly do. But that's going to do it for the Edition XV review. It's a great change of pace from Hifiman and of their sort of quartet of new releases. This is a serious contender for my favorite of the bunch. Seriously, if you've hated Hifiman headphones because of how fatiguing and bright they are, please give these a try. They might win you over. Coming up next is my actual favorite of the new batch of Hifiman headphones, the spellbinding HE600. For now, though, thank you so very much for watching. Huge shout out to all of the Compadres Club members. Remember, $5 a month, and you get to decide what I review with your money, and you help make the channel more independent, less reliant on samples, tours, and so on. I really appreciate all of you. I really hope you've enjoyed the video. I hope you have a great rest of your day. This has been Omar with Audio Amigo Reviews, and I will catch y'all next time.